Welcome. My name is Alyssa Miller. I'm a passionate industry advocate, a public relations consultant, and a member of the Internet Infrastructure Coalition, which we call i2Coalition, the same name as the website, i2Coalition.com. And today's program unveils and celebrates the launch of the VPN Trust Initiative. Our panelists today will provide you with insights into consumer virtual private networking, VPN challenges, and the best practices that the i2Coalition's working group have addressed in the framework guidelines. We call this the VTI principle, short for VPN Trust Initiative. And today's panelists include Christian Dawson, who's i2Coalition's group's board of directors member. He's a former board chair. He's part of the i2Coalition staff and co-founder and executive director. So it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here, Christian. David Hamilton is also with the i2Coalition. He's the communications manager, and he will be participating in our conversation today. And we also have panelists including Vytautas Kaziakonis, founder and the chief executive officer of Surfshark, Harold Lee, vice president at ExpressVPN, Terry Myers, vice president of marketing at NetProtect, and Laura Tyrell, head of public relations at NordVPN. Now, the VTI Principles is an industry-led and member-driven consortium of leading VPNs that offers a comprehensive set of best practices for VPN, virtual private network providers, that bolster consumer confidence and provider accountability, and ultimately increases VPN adoption and access to the technology benefits. Now, founding members of the VTI initiative include 5 companies. You see some of them here today: ExpressVPN, NordVPN, ViperVPN, Surfshark, and NetProtect. And those VPN brands include Encrypt.me, WLVPN, SugarSync, IPVanish, StrongVPN, Overplay, and SaferVPN, and more. And what we're talking about is this framework that this group of industry experts voluntarily put together to serve as best practices for consumer VPN providers. And the goals of this initiative is to set forth best practices that meaningfully protect the privacy and security of individuals when using VPN technologies. It offers a practical and policy guidelines for VPN providers, much like those that we'll hear from today, and offers policymakers, regulators, and civil society with realistic benchmarks for evaluating these technologies. The principles has 5 core areas that we will begin to explore in just a moment. They include security, privacy, advertising best practices, disclosure and transparency, and social responsibility. So let's get to it, Christian. Why is the i2Coalition focusing on VPNs as an initiative?
Well, let me start to answer that question by telling you a little bit about who the i2Coalition is. We've been around for about 7 years, and we're a trade association that is built to build a singular voice for the people that build the infrastructure of the internet. What we mean by that is the people that rack and stack servers in data centers and build the types of companies that give you internet access in lots of different ways. That includes VPN companies, but writ large, we're also talking about cloud infrastructure providers. We're talking about domain registries and registrars. We're talking about web hosting providers, internet exchange points, edge providers. The list sort of goes on and on. We have been around for about 7 years, and our goal is to do more together than any one company can do apart to make sure that the industries of the internet survive and thrive. When we take a look at the internet industry, some people think of it as this thing that is amorphous. We use words like cloud. We use words like World Wide Web, and it seems like it's intangible, but really it's real people in real places working on real things, right? And so we try to bring education to communities that need it so that the internet infrastructure can continue to grow. Sometimes it's education, and legislators tend to need education because they, when they're trying to solve problems, can do so in tricky ways if they really don't understand how the nuts and bolts of the internet work. So if we can hold their hand and say, let us explain to you how this stuff actually works, they can come to solutions that are acceptable. A lot of people have preconceived notions that the internet's just a few big companies, when indeed that it's made up of a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, a lot of businesses that started in basements and dorm rooms. And so solutions that people have to try to address problems end up needing to have solutions to them that scale down. So we end up having conversations about how to make the internet a better, safer, stronger place in ways that scale down. Now let's talk about VPNs and why we decided to work on the VPN Trust Initiative. It started very much as a VPN member-led initiative. We had a couple of VPN members of our organization that came to us and they said, we've got a lot of people that are talking about VPNs and they don't really understand them. In fact, there were a couple of legislative situations where we heard in the press that there were people that were looking to ban VPNs outright that called them nefarious technologies. Sometimes it wasn't VPN. Sometimes it was talking about strong encryption, vilifying encryption, talking about it being a problem. And we decided that we really needed a specific initiative that focused attention on VPNs in a way that allowed the people in the VPN industry to build a singular voice to talk about the good that the VPN industry does. Once we decided that we were going to do that, we could all come together and be cheerleaders for the VPN industry. We realized that in order to do that from an authoritative standpoint, we needed to spend some time talking about what makes a good VPN company. And so I think that we actually announced that we were pulling together this group around 9 months ago. It took us 9 months of meetings on a regular basis for all these companies to sit down and methodically go through, for us to listen to each other, for us to learn about each other and how we operate and how we run our businesses, to start to put some core principles down on paper about what we considered good practices in the VPN industry. By creating this particular document as a way to start the conversation about what good the VPN industry does, and using this as sort of our formative document to start the conversation with the public and with legislators and what have you about the good that the VPN industry does, we were able to, what I call, establish a floor. Not necessarily a ceiling. There may be lots of people that do more than what the principles say on various topics, but start a floor and say, when we're talking about VPN activities and the good that they do for the world, we're talking about companies that are above this bar. So that's the work that we've done over the last 9 months, and it gives you a little context as to why we did it.
It's amazing, right? And if we're not doing this as a collective, when and should issues come up, because there's always a lot of cyber risks out there, we risk that others will make these decisions for us. So it's really important that the i2Coalition is bringing together the best minds of the industry to help mitigate and get ahead of some of the issues that might be out there and help educate the marketplace. So really appreciate what you guys are doing. In this group here, Vitalis, I'm going to ask you this question because we've talked about this before, but in your opinion, why are the VTI principles important today?
Yeah, hi, I'm Vitalis. I'm CEO and founder of Surfshark. So we were one of the companies who also approached with the idea of actually establishing this. And I personally believe that establishing principles that would bring more trust and transparency is long overdue. And the reason for that is because user trust is such a critical element for any VPN company to succeed. And until today, it has not been easy to fulfill that promise of trust without having any benchmark to substantiate the claim. Every VPN provider, for example, had its own idea how, what the acceptable practices are, what protocols should be used, what is secure and what is not. And so all these participants of this webinar have been working on those principles to establish the benchmark in privacy and security, advertising practices, transparency and social responsibility. So these principles will help consumers make informed decisions and guide VPN providers to offer trustworthy services. The principles are also essential for other parties, such as government officials and policymakers, which you mentioned as well. And having this single document we all agree on will help get us a voice and whenever approaching lawmakers, because the issues we face in policymaking have not disappeared. And in the 90s, we had issues with cryptography ban exports, and the discussions are coming back again. And because what we believe the internet is for, we strongly stand for those principles. And I think the VPN Trust Initiative will hopefully allow us to get our voice out and possibly make for better change.
Yeah, and what's really important there, I think, is the word trust. Part of the challenge that you all have to overcome is both not just with the regulators and policymakers, but also with the consumer buyers. And Christian, you mentioned that you started this 9 months ago, which means that you guys began creating the framework for this before the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, that really drove a lot more utilization over the internet. And so, Terry, I wanted to ask you about that, because when we look at the importance of VPNs, especially now, the current landscape with everybody working from home raises the question and awareness of how do you keep yourself secure on that internet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when COVID hit, especially in the US in March, we saw that employers almost had to take this dramatic step forward in the type of technology that they're doing, in the type of workplace that people are working from. And they still need to do it while maintaining the privacy and the security of their customers, of their employees. And we just saw this dramatic uptake in VPN. And then, the VTI is allowing us to continue to go forward because of the fact that, as Christian said, it's setting that floor and setting the best practices as to how to best service these customers and gain trust in the world as we know it today, where everyone is working from home.
And it's important to understand that, what we're talking about here is trust in consumer VPNs, which is a little bit different than corporate VPNs. And Harold, I know, you're going to bring in the importance of those VPNs services, not just corporate, but consumer VPNs for security and privacy, just as Terry mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's all about, right? And I think we can all agree we are here and we're an industry and we're providing VPNs because we care so much about privacy and security on the internet. So, feel free to cut me off if I'm rambling on, because there's so much to talk about here. But as you and Terry have pointed out, we've long been increasingly living our lives online, and now during this pandemic, it's like we're living our entire lives online, and we've got so much data out there on ourselves, and personal data, sensitive data. And the key question that people have, consumers and corporations alike, is how do we protect that online data? And how do we protect our lives online, essentially? So I think VPNs are really central to that. Certainly, they're not the only tool. They're not a cure-all. But for example, the encryption that VPNs provide help ensure that all your traffic is encrypted so that people on the same network, maybe a malicious actor or your internet provider, can't see the contents of your traffic. So that's just one really central example of the benefits that it can provide.
I don't know if any of our other panelists have any comments about other benefits of security and privacy that are really important for consumers to be aware of in the importance of using a consumer trusted VPN service.
Well, I might add also that obviously there are a number of different use cases where consumer VPNs come in, and Harold has mentioned one example, but we use that three big use cases as being privacy, security, and access. So Harold's example was security example. Another would be privacy when, for example, you are in the area where you might not have such a free press, for example, and you might want to write about topics which are sensitive. You might want to make sure that you are protected, and it's much harder to find who is actually the original writer. And that's, I think, it's very fundamental and important for this technology to be able to reach those people who need it. And the third is access. So access meaning that there are lots of different countries or regions or areas where, for one reason or the other, people are not able to reach the internet as it's supposed to be. It's still very divided. It's still very restricted. And I'm sure every one of you know plenty of countries who do that. And as a companies, our responsibility here is not only making a business case, but also at the same time helping those people reach potentially the resources, being education or whatnot, or a different opinion. That's my point on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. And to that point, right, you were talking about some examples and using that as a reference point, which is a great segue into one of the principles that we're going to discuss, which is the advertising practices and the disclosure and transparency of VPNs, right? You've got a lot of people out there who don't know what VPNs are. They see an offer on the internet. They believe every word they say because they read it on the internet, and they're going to go. So how does the VTI address those practices and those disclosures? Laura, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so hi everyone, Laura from NordVPN. So yeah, as you mentioned, VPN industry is changing lately, perhaps for several years now. And if before VPNs were usually used by tech-savvy people, now it's a tool used by regular households. And another thing is that VPN market is expanding in general. There are a lot of new players entering the market. So in the final end, there is a huge variety of different VPN providers offering different benefits and different features. And of course, for tech-savvy people, this is not a problem because usually they are knowledgeable enough to choose a VPN provider according to their needs. But this other part of VPN consumers, for them, it's much more difficult. And this means that VPN advertising must be simple, but at the same time, very straightforward and very transparent, because we have to cover those two very different groups. And I would even say that for less tech-savvy people, we have to speak in a language that is familiar for them. And it's always a struggle because VPN is actually, it's not such a simple tool. It's quite complicated, and it's not, as Harold mentioned, it's not a cure for everything. Yes, we have to explain for users that such cybersecurity tools as VPNs, they can help you to be more secure and more private online. But in reality, actually, no one is absolutely 100% safe in the digital world. It's a sad thing, but that's true. You can use all best cybersecurity tools, including VPN, antivirus, various firewalls, password managers, everything. But you can do one tiny mistake, or if you are, for example, willingly share your data somewhere online, well, nothing can save you from cyber attacks. So this is a thing where we work every day trying to balance those two things. On one hand, explain in a simple manner for people what is a VPN, on the other, not like boosting their expectations.
So this is Christian. I wanted to make one quick point. As Laura walked us through the details of the advertising practices section of the principles document, I wanted to make one broader comment to reinforce one of the goals of creating the entire principles document. It's just what you said, Laura. We tried to make the entire document readable by normal users, by normal humans, in ways that were really clear and concise, so that they could be promises to consumers that they can get. David Hamilton, who's here on this webinar together, he was our lead drafter on the principles creation, worked with all of these companies in order to get this down. And David's background is in journalism, not in technology, though it's technology journalism, certainly. But the goal is to make it very human readable. So thank you for pointing that out, Laura.
Absolutely. And one of the things I would also add to on the transparency note, as well. The business model of these companies that I've been so lucky to work with, it is all around protecting people's data. So we do have a lot of companies now, and people are maybe rightfully suspicious of their data being used in unintended ways, but there is a certain transparency around what these VPN providers are doing and their business model, where they're in the business of not revealing people's data. So you're assured that when you choose these VPNs, they're not going to be that weak link that exposes your data, because they've committed to these principles and they're transparent around their business model, that it's not about collecting your data. It's not about exposing you to those risks. It's actually the exact opposite of that. And that's what makes them successful. And I think that's what's going to be a really important point going forward, and why these VTI principles are so important.
Yeah, so to that point, David, you wrote up that, the disclosure and transparency, there are three main bullets, right, that I extracted for us, right? Disclose how data is used by their business and other business units and third parties. So be honest and clear about that. Publish those annual transparency reports, and then provide data only upon legitimate and valid court-ordered legal requests, right? Now, there's a lot of uncertainty out there about, what obligations each of your companies has to reporting on what's happening over the internet. And so this helps to give the consumer a sense of, what your obligations are, but also a sense of security with what they're giving you as far as information about themselves and what you're going to do with that, right?
Absolutely. So the principles really hammer home that the VPN providers are going to act in ethical ways, and also they will go out of their way to ensure that your data is not being used by third parties that you are not privy to. So this is the codification of these principles that I'd say all of these VPNs were already enacting. So this isn't anything new to these companies, because they actually really value everyone's safety and security when they're dealing with people's data. So I think that this is putting into language something that these companies abide by and they really believe in, I think, on a fundamental level. And in helping draft this document, I've had discussions with members, and you can really feel the passion for what they're accomplishing with these principles and what they're doing every day in the industry and upholding these standards.
Yeah, so you set me up for my segue, David, because I wanted to talk about VPN social responsibility, because there's so many different examples out there of the bad actors and the good actors, and I think that as we shift into some of these examples to give our viewers a really hands-on sense of what we're actually talking about. A lot of what we're positioning here is conceptual, but let's put it into some practice. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Harold. I know you and ExpressVPN, have a passion about that social responsibility. You want to share some insights?
For sure. I mean, I think what we hear most from our users and from people we speak with is that they feel like they're losing control on internet, right? They're losing control to governments to decide what sites or services they can access. They're losing control to tech companies selling their data and using it in ways that they didn't intend. And I think the core of our social responsibility is to return that control. And that looks like different things for different segments. So Vitalis talked about maybe you're a sensitive individual. For example, ExpressVPN works with an organization called Frontline Defenders. They're activists in countries where it would be very dangerous for them to be tracked, for it to be obvious to their government what they're doing online. And it might be that sensitive, but it could also, social responsibility also just means, you're an average consumer of the internet. We want to make sure that you have control over who you're sharing your data with, who has access to that. And, that is the center and core of what we're doing.
I mean, think about it, right? Everyone's homes are connected. How many of you have an Alexa or, a Siri device or something that can hear you and listen into you? And so, that becomes also something for us to be aware of, creating that security around your home, right, Harold?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, out to kind of link it all back to the honest advertising kind of angle. I think that's a great example where people might be confused about, okay, I'm talking to Alexa, what's the risk there and how do I protect against it? A VPN in that circumstance probably isn't helping unless there's something going wrong with the encryption on your smart speaker. But I think that's exactly the kind of topic that we've been trying to tackle. Like, why does it take 9 months for a bunch of people who all agree that we want to be doing good and we want to be doing clear, honest advertising to sort out the topics? Because it's complex. And when we try to simplify it for the consumer, we want to make sure things don't get lost. But often when in this world, in the technical world, often the answer is it depends, right? So often I compare it to, again, talking about the home. If you buy a home security system and it says it's going to keep you safe, no consumer thinks it's going to keep your home safe from termites. And they probably don't think that it's going to prevent the CIA from breaking in if they really want to, right? And that when we, as VPN providers, say something like, it keeps you safe, we have to be cognizant that users might not know that it doesn't protect against every single threat they might face. And that is something that we want to be really thoughtful about. And I think that's why this process is taking a long time. And it's going to be an ongoing process as we continue the VPN Trust Initiative to work internally to strengthen that, and also to communicate externally to make sure that we're educating people about what VPNs do and what they don't do.
It's such a great analogy, because I think that a lot of people, take that you're going to be safe online as an overall blanket statement, but it's important for people to understand, well, what is safety that we're defining in that, and the VTI does touch upon that. But you also talked about being safe in different countries and regulators and all that kind of stuff. I know, Laura, you and I have had conversations about the perspective from the PR world and freedom of speech and journalists out there. From your perspective, VPN social responsibility is even greater, right?
Yes, so working within a VPN industry includes taking into account expectations from very diverse global stakeholders, because all over the world there are thousands of journalists, human rights activists, and I don't know, even just community leaders who are working in their own environments, but they're trying to change the world for the better or for their communities. And sadly, there are a lot of restrictions and a lot of surveillance, and sometimes those people, they cannot access the internet, they cannot spread their word. And even what seems normal completely for us, like connecting to the internet every day, for them quite often is a question of freedom, or imprisonment, or even worse. So this is a big issue in some parts of the world. And it's actually what we usually see, that if political tensions or some conflicts occur in some part of the world, usually interest in VPNs grows. So it means that people are looking for a VPN, they are looking for freedom, or freedom of speech, for a free internet. And that is a big issue. And what Harold mentioned a bit, I believe that another important thing is education, because those people quite often, they need access to a free internet, but then they don't know how to, and they don't know which VPN providers to trust. So VTI principles, I guess, will help even in this area.
I think the principle, in part, by educating consumers, we also will not allow them to put themselves in danger sometimes by having unrealistic expectations what VPNs can do, especially in the cases you mentioned. That, I think, for me personally, is also very important, rather than just saying, oh, we're gonna protect more and more people, but also we might protect them by saying not to use VPNs in those cases. So this is where VTI principles can help as well.
Yeah, those social responsibilities are certainly important. As we shift up to our last benefit of what the VTI principles brings, which is, benefits to society and establishing trust in VPNs, it's important to note that with everyone, I mean, almost 100% reliant on digital communications now throughout the world. There's no doubt an increase in good and bad actors out there. And what we're trying to do, and the VTI is trying to do, is to help individuals protect themselves from those bad actors. How are you seeing the industry changing for the good, bad, or indifferent? And how should consumers be looking at VPNs in their day-to-day online communications? Anybody can jump right in here.
I can start. I mean, just to make it easier, although I guess Harold was also about to say something, but as a consumer, it's important to do your research. Not even if you are not a technical person, there are things you can check for when choosing consumer VPN. One of the easiest ways to ask yourself is, what is the business model of this company? If this company is providing you something for free, usually, the standard saying is you are the product. And the more established and trusted VPN companies' business model, usually subscription based, they don't need to sell your data to earn their business share. While free VPNs, they are not free. They are free for the reason, right? They're either selling your browsing habits, or they're injecting ads into your traffic, or they're doing something even more malicious. This is the very basic thing that I would check for first. And then obviously there are things such as what are the terms and conditions, what they're claiming to do, and what your actual needs are. VPN for different reason, and one provider can do that, other might not. Then there are additional layers of functionalities which are on top of VPN, and different companies provide different layers. Some might bundle VPN with antivirus software. Others might provide some very technical multi-tunneling, which you might need for your use case. So these are all the additional details you might look for.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about as a user, right? If you are working for a company that requires you to use a VPN, there's a reason that they're requiring you to do that. And so think about yourself as an individual, as a consumer, and all of the information and exchanging of data for your personal family self that you're transacting now online, whether it's to a bank or to a social platform or browsing data. VPNs are protecting those businesses. Your personal family is a business, and using a VPN to protect your personal family business is equally important as a business would apply it. Anybody have anything else to add?
I did want to say, I think we've made it sound very complex, but fortunately, once you pick the VPN provider, it's very simple. You download it, it's an app, you tap a button, you're good to go. So I don't want to scare people off as well, but I think to echo Vitali's point, it is so simple to use that it's worthwhile doing your homework before you actually choose a VPN provider that then you can kind of set and forget afterwards, hopefully. And I think one thing I would add as well is one thing we've been talking a lot about within the VPN Trust Initiative is the value of audits, right? So you don't just have to trust a VPN provider at its word. You can also trust the third parties that have had an opportunity to examine that VPN provider, examine its servers, its code, its processes. And that's something that is really something that you can look to as a standard of trust of whether you should trust a VPN or not, because there are these trusted third parties doing audits.
One thing I would like to add is we've talked about people doing their homework. My hope is that the principles process has hopefully made it easier for you to do your homework. We have this document that you can review, and it can give you some thoughts as to what's important to you to make sure that as you look at the companies that are in this space, you can evaluate them based on their adherence to some of these principles. Not all VPN providers are created equal. And honestly, a lot of the principles on there are not specific to particular business models. So people approach things very differently. But it gives you a lot of things to think about when you're doing that homework. If you go to vpntrust.net, the principles are about 8 pages long. That can be heavy reading. There's also a 1-page summary that you can find. And if you just want to scan that, it gives you some ideas of what it is you can look into. Of course, we've also got companies that are within the VPN Trust Initiative, and their little badge tells you a lot. But no matter who you're looking at, you can take a look at the 8-page version of the one-page summary, and you can get some ideas on how you can do that research.
I'd just like to add another point, though, that there are a lot of really interesting VPNs that make up the VTI too. Not everyone works under sort of a traditional VPN business model, if you could call it that. The VTI principles are written in such a way that there is a lot of innovation. There's a company that uses people's personal internet connections to sort of create a more granular VPN, which is extremely interesting. So they're able to do that while still adhering to the principles and using all of the best practices and stuff like that. So it would be really interesting, I think, for a lot of people to just check out who the VPN providers are on the website.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, David, because with the VTI, we're not trying to dictate how someone should run their business. We're not trying to stifle innovation. We're just trying to set that floor to ensure that the customer is choosing the right solution for them.
Yeah, and remember, as consumers, free means that you're the product, right? As Vitalis mentioned, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but that protection, when you're paying, actually, it's an agreed term. You're trusting them with this information and that they're going to do and protect you online to the degree that they're promising that they do. All right. I am going to ask for any final comments. So I will call out your names and ask for you to make any closing statements about this process, about the VTI initiative, and anything you want our viewers to take away on our close. So I will start with you, Harold.
Sure. I'll just say one thing, which is that, yes, it's the VPN Trust Initiative, but I think what we're all talking about is more than just VPNs. It is the very state of privacy, security, and freedom on the internet, and how do we advocate for those things. So I think something that we talked about earlier was the value of encryption, how critical that is. That is something that we're fighting for because that's how we protect our users, but it's foundational to security and privacy on the internet overall. And I think that's something that the VPN Trust Initiative hopes to be able to bring to the forefront, not just VPNs as a tool, but also the problems that it's trying to address.
Awesome. Thank you. Laura.
Yeah, and perhaps I'd say that, well, in the future, it's seeing what's happening in the world, it's a big chance that the importance of VPNs will grow. But mainstream use of VPN services will make it harder to make a monopoly of personal data, and will leave at least certain aspects of privacy for people, for ourselves.
Oh, that's great. Terry.
Yeah, I think as Harold said, the benefit of encryption, they're such a great benefit. And when we kind of think about VPN as a whole, without encryption, there really isn't a way to privacy. And in our view is that, you have privacy or you don't. And we really think that privacy should be just like water. You should have that right to it, no matter where you are in the world.
Awesome. Thank you. Vitalis.
Yeah, lots of very good points. Difficult to add something, but I guess with it, overall, the internet trend in the last 10 years was towards collecting more and more data about consumers, and VPNs themselves, I think, kind of try to counter that somewhat. So there's a balance of a choice for the consumer to actually some control, or at least somewhat control, his sharing preferences. And the VTI principles and the whole initiative hopefully will somehow consolidate the efforts and spearhead, the initiative into the broader waters.
Awesome. All right, David, I'm going to go to you and I'll let Christian get the close.
Sure. So again, really great points. I think that one of the issues is that we kind of are at a tipping point where a lot of regulators and politicians are starting to look at encryption and VPNs with suspicion, even though I would imagine most politicians on business trips and just in their general use are actually using VPNs. So there's a certain element of irony to that. But I think we're at a stage where we really need to sort of band together and make sure that VPNs and encryption are an important issue, and that people with power, they understand it and they're able to sort of make the right decisions for everyone.
And make it easy and effective and secure for people to trust those providers. All right, Christian, you get the last word, I promise.
I appreciate it. When Vitalis was talking about some of the cases where VPNs are used in ways that even if you consider outlier cases, you're talking about things like reporters who need to be able to get stories out in anonymity. You're talking about people who are in areas in which free speech is being stifled and they want internet access so that they can be a part of a community in which they can get their voices out. These are examples of reasons for VPNs to exist in the world that, as Laura said, are only getting more and more important. And that is why I'm incredibly honored for i2Coalition to be in a place where we can help bring together all these VPN companies with a singular voice to try and figure out how we can start a conversation with the public and the people that are going to help make sure that the things that we do and the tools that we give to the world continue to grow, to continue to be accessible, continue to be understood. And so I wanted to tell people that this is a release of a document, but it's the start of a conversation. From here, we're going to go out there and we're going to be that singular voice. We're going to be out there talking to people, making sure that we are there as the protectors and defenders and voice of this industry, but also here to listen, to figure out how to evolve the principles, to evolve the industry, to make sure that we continue to hold these core ideas behind what good the internet and the VPN technology specifically can give to the world, that we can make sure that we hold that up. So I'm excited to be a part of it, and I'm really hoping that all of you go to vpntrust.net, take a look at the 8-pager, take a look at the 1-page summary, go ahead and take a look at the companies that are a part of this and engage us as part of that conversation.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for all your great work in getting this together. And let's make sure the market knows that there should be trust in VPNs if you're part of the VTI. And you've just raised that floor, guys. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.